Welcome. All right, we are live. Okay, well, I am going to get into it. I don't know if anyone's here, but as usual, welcome everybody to the TCG Buyers Club stream. My name's Gray. I buy cardboard, and I'm on a mission to make collecting and investing in Pokemon simple. And it's been a couple weeks since we last did the stream. I went on vacation and missed a couple of my kind of usual times, and took a minute to get life back in order to where we could do this again. But I'm really excited to be back, and we're gonna do what we always do: talk a little bit about this week's newsletter idea and the thinking behind it, have any conversation, question and answers with anyone who's here live, and hopefully we all just learn a little bit more about collecting and investing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this week's newsletter because it's kind of an interesting one. I really enjoyed writing it, and it was inspired by a piece that Harry Rinker, who I reference a lot, who kind of defined the collectibles cycle that I now look to a lot in how I think about collectibles. He wrote this piece ages ago. I don't even know when, late 90s maybe. And in one of his columns, I've been reading one of his books, How to Think Like a Collector. Look at that absolutely legendary cover. This thing is ridiculous. It's a collection of his, essentially, newsletters, his columns over years and years, kind of organized into his best thinking. It's been great, to be honest. Trying to dive into the broader collectibles topics. I've read some of his columns online, but it's difficult when you go column by column. This is just really nice organization. And he talked about this idea of collecting consciousness, which was just the turning point in his mind where North America became very aware of the value of collecting. And he says it happened in the 1970s. So he mentioned that in one of his columns that's published in that book. And it just got me thinking a lot about how there was this time that he refers to in the 1970s where people just became aware of the value in their old things and saw other people discovering a lot of value in their old things, and how that planted the seed for the collecting culture that emerged in North America, and how since then it has evolved significantly. And so that's what the article's about. That's what I wrote about this week, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, as usual, we're starting on my website, tcgbuyersclub.com. If you're not subscribed, by the way, you can come here at any time. You can sign up just by putting your email address in here, and I will give you my ultimate guide to collectible cycle investing right away. You get it right off the bat, and then you get a weekly newsletter from me just exploring different topics in collectibles and collectibles investing. And of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. It's totally free. I have nothing to sell you. All of this is just because I love writing about collectibles. Scrolling down, articles, 1970s, collecting consciousness created a monster. This is the article that I wrote over the past week, and I'm going to start going through it. We're going to build on the ideas that I just introduced. Okay, so North America discovered the value of collectibles in the 1970s. This was when large auction sales and stories of valuable treasures found in attics, basements, and more became front-page news. The 70s is when collecting went mainstream. Collector and writer Harry Rinker describes this as when America became collecting conscious. There was a wholesomeness to this early collecting movement. Americans were rediscovering and celebrating their old furniture, toys, and family heirlooms, objects that were passed down through their family or waited patiently and stored from their childhoods. And this is what I think is the interesting starting point, because this birth of collecting consciousness in North America, it was like old stuff that generally probably wasn't that useful or used anymore. So I found a picture of some old toys as an example, old tin robots. But it was also antique furniture, like early 1900s, late 1800s furniture of all kinds and varieties. It was just random things around the home, like old kitchen tools and bowls and pots and pans and all that sort of stuff. This was generally, I would say, like retired technology that represented a cultural moment in history. And there's just a lot of people who had this stuff lying around. Like some random piece of art or structure passed down in their family. And in the 70s is when it started to become valuable again. And so by the late 70s, we had Antiques Roadshow, which was started in the UK. It came to North America in the 90s, quite a bit later. We had that kick off. And really through Harry Rinker, he talks about all like the news stories and coverage about big sales of these antiques and these older collectibles. Like the collectibles of this time were not the types of collectibles we're looking at today with Pokemon cards, sports cards, comic books, and things like that. That would come a little bit later. Okay. Specifically, building off that, I want to say this was the time before mass-produced pop culture collectibles, but it laid the foundation for them. The 70s may have started as a boom in antique furniture and other cultural artifacts, but it grew into new attention for sports cards and comic books. Both categories that, even by the 1970s, already had a long history of production. So sports cards were first produced in the 1800s and included in packs of cigarettes, while comic books date back to the 1930s. At least comic strips existed before that, so you could have like newspaper and magazine publications that had comic strips like we still have today. But dedicated printed books, like comic books, that really started in the 1930s. Okay, so rare copies of sports cards and comic books started to surge at auction. So in 1985, collecting consciousness started in the 70s. By the 80s, we were starting to see some real momentum behind these broader, what really are the pop culture collectibles categories. A T206 Honus Wagner sold for $25,000, which was a milestone sale. If you don't know the T206, it's one of the most valuable sports cards. It is from, I think, like the early 1900s. I actually forget the specific year. And Honus Wagner is a popular baseball player, but he also took issue with cigarette companies marketing themselves to children and younger people. And because sports cards were distributed through these cigarette packs, he actually didn't want to be involved in it. So the cigarette company printed his cards and put them in packs. He said no and forced them to stop. And as a result, the Honus Wagner is by far the scarcest card from that collection in sort of this early generation of trading cards. Yeah, I can't remember the year. It might have been the 1930s or something by this time when the Honus Wagner card came out. But from there, prices continued to grow. And by 1991, so from 1985 to 1991, 6 years later, apparently a T206 Honus Wagner sold for $450,000 US to Wayne Gretzky and I think maybe a pool of collectors who bought it. And yeah, that was a crazy amount of money to spend on a card, and they sold it for more later, so it still worked out. Now, the comic book boom kicked off a bit later. And so comic books started in the 1930s, and by 1992, there was this major sale of an Action Comics #1, which is the first appearance of Superman, that sold for $82,500. And that, again, huge milestone sale, got a ton of attention in the early 90s. So we've already kind of progressed from the 70s to the 90s here. And I think sports cards in the 80s and into the early 90s and comic books in the sort of early into late 90s really defined the transition from the early collecting consciousness into like pop culture collecting and pop culture collectibles, with these categories leading the charge. And there's probably others that I haven't sort of unearthed yet in my research, but these two really stand out. And what's obvious here is that the booms in these categories started with these truly rare examples, like the T206 Wagner and Action Comics #1. These are very true collectibles in the sense that they have become highly desirable, in part because of their rarity, when they were kind of just throwaway items meant to be like consumed and like lost or discarded. And so because they're so old and they were never intended to be like collectible in this way, very few examples exist. And they both represent incredibly important pieces in like the culture and history of these collecting categories, and they're incredibly rare. So high prices for objects like this make a lot of sense. This is Art Illustrator Pikachus and Trophy Pikachus from the late 90s in Japan, except in categories that are far older and have, carry a lot more cultural and historical significance as a result of that. So it makes sense. High prices for these categories make sense. But the key is that the attention for high prices that makes sense on these objects drives tons of new attention and new people to the new modern editions of these products in these categories. And I don't know if this is how you would define, like, what is a pop culture collectible? I don't know if this is how you would define it, but it's certainly an important characteristic of a pop culture collectible, which is often that they're still being manufactured, they're still in production. And so we talked about in the 70s, these like antiques and old antiques and older cultural artifacts becoming kind of valuable as collectibles. People sort of collecting and holding on to these moments in history or these objects from their past. And these are generally things that were created often in large quantities and played an important role in some capacity in the past. Furniture, people needed furniture. There was no mass-produced furniture. There was no IKEA. So you got these like handmade wooden pieces from artisans in and around what you could access, like the United States, if you were there. It makes sense. And like all kinds of old like plates and things like that. And a lot of the popular collectibles, they kind of had a moment and then went away. Like there are businesses that were really big and went under and they stopped producing their products. Like they make some kind of fancy plate and then they go out of business. So they don't persist. But sports cards and comics had been in near constant production, if not probably constant production, from the time that they were kind of released to modern day. And so while the rare, truly exceptional examples were selling for record prices, if you wanted to get into it, you don't seek out those truly rare examples. They're impossible to find. They're incredibly expensive because they're impossible to find. No, you go to the store and you buy modern packs of sports cards, or you go buy modern comic books. And in both cases, there's very good reasons to. Like the modern example is probably, they introduce like foiling in cards, or in comic books, you have great modern stories, new takes on old stories, new innovations coming out all the time. It makes sense why you'd go to the modern stuff. But what happens is you start to see a boom in the modern stuff, and the modern stuff doesn't share the rarity, let alone the cultural and historical significance factors of the pieces that were incredibly expensive and fetch the high prices. And this is where you get those like collectibles bubbles, where everyone thinks that the product's going to go up, and because there's so much attention coming in, even the new mass-produced stuff is getting more and more expensive and feels like you've hit the jackpot. It's very relatable to everyone here, I'm sure. But the fundamentals aren't the same. It's like a misattribution of the qualities of the historical pieces onto the newer pieces. And in both the cases of sports cards and comic books, it ended in a big crash. So that's where the article goes on. And I don't know if I'm going to read this word for word, but let's talk a little bit about sports cards. Because sports cards are, I talk about it all the time, is one of the most famous crashes in the history of pop culture collectibles. And this is because by the peak of, say, I think it was by the early 90s and into the sort of mid 90s, with sports cards, you had tons of companies all competing for the attention of that market. And so they're all printing as much as they could to meet demand, and they flooded the market with an insane quantity of cards. And so while there's no official numbers, it's distributed across all these different companies that made sports cards at the time that you can't really know. In my research, it's estimated that they were printing 81 billion cards a year. And this was in the 1990s. So compare that to Pokemon cards, just for context. We think about how many goddamn Pokemon cards are printed every year in today's environment. Well, last year, the Pokemon company printed 10 billion cards. So we're talking more than 8 times the production in the 90s of sports cards in order to meet this massive demand. And ultimately, that modern supply just completely tanked the market for all kinds of modern. People were buying them all this time, thinking they're going to be really valuable, and then finding out that they are everywhere in enormous quantities, and prices are going down lower and lower and lower. So prices tanked. And this became what we now call the junk wax era. Wax meaning the wax packages that packs of cards were put into. And it's junk because there's just so much of it. And I'm not too sophisticated with sports cards. I don't know that much about the current prices and things. But my understanding is that the cards from this junk wax era have like barely recovered since then, despite being more than 30 years old. Like, we're talking older than Japanese Pokemon cards from 1996. These are cards in the early 90s, and they're still worthless, more or less, just for context of how that played out. And of course, with the modern crash, it kind of drags the whole market down with it for a bit. It kind of led to this overall correction. And something similar happened with comic books. With comic books, looking into it a little bit, you really had the comic book manufacturers leaning into the high demand, and as well as some new behaviors that were emerging from the collector base. So as comic book enthusiasts saw high prices for old comic books, they thought, oh, wow, like there's a lot of value in protecting and storing my comic books so that they'll stay in good condition over the long term. And, you know, in another 20, 30 years, maybe they weren't even thinking that long, these new comic books I'm buying in stores could be worth a lot of money. Like, my collection can become really valuable. So you started to see this culture shift in comic books. Where did I write about this? Let's see. I guess I wrote about it further up, maybe. So what you saw in comic books was, I'm just going to change back to the camera. You saw a culture of protection and preservation emerge in the comic book communities. People wanted to keep their comic books in good condition for the long term. Makes sense. And the other thing you saw was just collectors buying more comic books. Like, you buy one book to read and one to store, so that you have your long-term collection item in great condition, and the one that you actually page through and read and maybe damage a little bit, you know, the one for you. And so the comic book manufacturers saw this, like, oh, sweet, like, these collectors, like, they really care about these items. They think they're going to carry a lot of long-term value, and they're taking really good care of them. They're buying multiple copies. How can we feed into that? So they started doing things like releasing special limited release versions with alternative cover variants and things like that. And covers are particularly important with comic books because you slab them, it's really all you can look at is the front and the back. So the cover variants could be kind of special. And they did all kinds of like fun things like that, and sort of leaned into like giving more collectors more reasons to buy more copies of books, which they would then keep in really good condition. But the same thing occurred. These were produced in high quantities. Even like the rare collector variants of new comic books were produced in massive quantities. And again, I don't know exactly what the status of the prices in this market is. I know comic books are not booming quite in the same way TCGs are right now. I'm sure there's still some value to these books in some capacity, but relative to people's expectations and the bubble at the time, it was quite dramatic. And so, of course, it crashed. And you do have a similar dynamic to sports cards in comic books, where there were multiple manufacturers of comic books selling multiple different stories and things like that. So anyways, you see some very similar things. Now, what I think is interesting, there's a couple things here. One is these crashes obviously didn't end the market. Like, comic books are still very popular, and comic book collecting is still a thing. Sports card collecting, also bigger than ever, still very much a thing. None of these crashes totally ended the market, but they did have a pretty significant reset. And what caused the crashes in these pop culture collectibles was kind of so I think of it as the corporate harnessing of what made collectibles popular. And I want to say kind of like abusing it. They really like leaned into what was hooking collectors onto the product and tried to use those instincts and those drives to like really, really ramp up the demand and squeeze as much as they could out of the collectors and print as much as they could while maintaining the illusion of rarity and urgency, to the point where they kind of burnt out the market and pushed it too far, where they couldn't maintain the illusion anymore. And so you have this birth of collecting consciousness in the 70s, which you mentioned was just like a very innocent and like honest rediscovery of history and culture that then morphed into this like corporatized machine monster that ultimately crashed the market and caused a lot of issues, and still leads into today's environment and what we have in the market today, which is what's so interesting. Because I conclude this article saying that, the crashes across comics and sports cards were inevitable with how the companies and manufacturers and everyone was handling it. They didn't permanently kill it. And if anything, these categories kind of proved the viability of the mass-produced collectible. They proved that you can have cards or comic books from history that are now just really old and hard to find, and proved that you can create a market off the back of these truly rare collectibles, but you can keep producing new versions and new things and selling it into the market, and kind of have this constant sliding scale of age where you're constantly making new things, but then you stop and you move on to the next thing, and those things slowly age and decrease in quantity and availability and things like that. And you can run that game over the long term, because I think this is the key sort of interesting takeaway for me, was the shift from these collectibles that sort of existed for a period of time and then went away and then started to become coveted years after their production stopped and they'd stopped being useful and they kind of fell into obscurity, into the market today where you have constant new production and new ideas entering the market, but you still have truly valuable older items in the category, like our Illustrator Pikachus and more. And Pokemon clearly has handled the market really well, and they've learned a lot from these other categories and done a good job of managing their production, their demand, etc. And probably, I don't know, gotten pretty good at it over time. I think we're a little overdue for some more supply to dampen the current market, but the fact that we're even in the market that we're in today is a testament to how the Pokemon Company has handled themselves over the last 30 years. And so, yeah, I just think it's really interesting. I've been trying to get into the history of collectibles more. I'm trying to educate myself a little bit more about other collectibles categories. Not because I'm very unlikely to start collecting sports cards, because I'm not a sports guy. But I'm really interested in the history of sports card collecting and investing, and where I can learn from those stories just to inform my understanding of Pokemon cards or other categories that maybe I get into in the future. Who knows? So that was sort of the point of this newsletter for this week, was that exploration of history and just the discussion about the significance of that transition from, I don't know, antiques. I'm going to call them antiques for the purpose of the distinction, and into mass-produced pop culture collectibles that are constantly manufactured. I thought it was really interesting. I had a lot of fun writing this one. I don't know if you guys liked it, but I thought it was cool. So that's this week's newsletter. So, of course, if you found that interesting, you think you might like other things I have to say about collectibles in the future, feel free to sign up. It is the best way to support me. Always means a lot. Gives me a direct channel to people who like my work, and opens up great conversation channels for you as well, being able to reply to the emails and discuss with me directly. And yeah, it means a lot. So if you want to sign up, if it interests you at all, as I said at the beginning of the stream here, you just go tcgbuyersclub.com. It couldn't be easier. Put your email address right in here, subscribe, and in your inbox you'll get my ultimate guide to collectible cycle investing, where I just break down all the phases of the collectible cycle, how it feels, how to identify it, and how to best handle yourself during those phases. Because the cycle is ultimately creates emotional reactions, and understanding how you feel, the psychology behind it, the emotions, goes a long way in knowing what you might do and choose to do to get just the best return on your time and energy invested in collecting and the hobby. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got. So I'll give it a second here, see if there's any questions, comments, if anyone wants to chat about anything. If not, we're just going to wrap up the stream, and yeah, I'm just going to hang out. Oh, hope everyone has been having a great day. While I wait, I don't know, well, I'm going to go check out Poke Beach, see if there's anything interesting to talk about here, because we do have some new stuff coming up. the Abyss Eye set. Interesting thing, Poke Beach has mentioned a couple times. I don't know if everyone here has picked up on it. And I don't know what I think about it yet, but the lack of double sets in Japan, I don't know. I'm not sure what the deal is, but it's all these like smaller single sets. So Japan generally produces smaller sets than North America, but sometimes they release the kind of two sets at once, or the set has two versions that come out at the same time, which makes them bigger sets. And then you'll often see like a double set plus a special set from Japan kind of get combined into one set. Like Evolving Skies was one of those sets, for example. It had Eevee Heroes was the special set, and then two Japanese sets, what do they call it? Blue Sky Stream and something Skyscraper. I forget what they called them. And then you get these big, like, multiple 100-card sets. But instead, Japan's just been releasing these single sets with, like, I don't know, it's like 100 cards. I'm not sure how many are actually in it. And then we get smaller sets in English, too, because there's just not enough sets coming out in Japan to make the bigger sets that we're used to. So we end up with all of these smaller sets. I don't know what the deal is. It's very interesting. So Abyss Eye is another one of these small sets, single set release coming out soon. And it's going to be a small set, which means we're going to have a small set too. And some people are saying it's like a printing control thing. If there's less cards that Japan has to print, they can print more of the other cards. I don't know that makes any sense, to be honest. Like, they can still produce the same number of cards. I don't know that concentrating it in smaller sets helps. I guess it does. I guess there actually is logic to that. Maybe I take that back. Still feels a little weird. I wonder if it's because they're like gearing up for really big sets. I definitely don't think it's a reaction to the US, like, English market. I don't think the Japanese business cares at all. Like, English is like, oh, we can't print enough to meet demand. The market's so crazy. Like, there's no reason for the Japanese company to change their production in response to that. So I don't buy that angle. So I don't know. It's interesting. I've been wondering if they're trying to like print a crap ton of the 30th anniversary set, and they need to like produce fewer. They need to make more printing capacity dedicated to that. I don't know. Pure speculation. I have no idea, but it's kind of weird. It's weird to see them change the pattern without really no acknowledgement. It's just happened over time. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the deal is. I guess we never will. All right. Well, if there's no questions today, that's all good. Thank you to all of you who tuned in, anyone who's watching this after the stream. Really appreciate you coming by. And hopefully you'll check out my newsletter and, of course, subscribe here, thumbs up, all that jazz, of course, means a lot. I plan to keep doing these weekly live streams and just chatting about whatever comes up. So, yeah, you're in the right place. But with that, the song is playing. The time has come. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into the TCG Buyers Club. My name's Gray. I buy cardboard, and I will see you all next time. As always, thank you for tuning in. Have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful night, day, whatever it is. Cheers.